My name is Paul Williver. I'm the owner of Pinellas Power Products. And this is the installation instruction video for the generators that use the 135cc engine that, I'm going to butcher this name, but at any rate, I think it's Chongqing Dingqing. It's a Chinese company that makes engines. At any rate, this engine is used on the MaXpeedingrods MXR3500. It is also used on the Pulsar PGD40 ISCO and probably several other generators that I'm not familiar with yet at the time. At any rate, this kit will allow you to hook this generator to any size external fuel tank that you wish, and it is not a gravity feed system. It uses a pump. We'll go ahead and get started on it. Both the side covers are held on with two machine screws that are short. And both the side covers are held on with the identical screws, so it doesn't matter which side you took the screws out of when you go to reassemble it. Next step is I'm going to take a set of forceps, and that's to clip the recoil start rope so it doesn't try to retract on us. Then, if you come over to the fuel selector knob, make sure that the fuel selector knob is in the off position so that it doesn't leak gasoline out on the next step. Then if you come over here, you'll notice that there are two fuel hoses that go to the back of the fuel selector valve. This one goes from the tank to the fuel selector valve, and this one goes from the fuel selector valve over to the carburetor. So we're going to undo this Corbin clamp. Squeeze the two tabs and slide it back. When we slide this hose off of this fuel filter, it's probably going to drip just a couple of drops of fuel. Okay. I'll show you how a Corbin clamp works real quickly. You squeeze the two tabs and the Corbin clamp opens up. You release them and the Corbin clamp closes. Okay, what we're going to do here is we want to find the exact point at which the fuel stops. Because if you come around the front, you'll notice that the fuel selector knob shuts off the spark and the fuel. So if you turn it on over to the run position and then start bringing it back slowly, you want to notice exactly where the fuel stops flowing. Because when it goes all the way to the off position, it stops the spark as well. So you don't want it all the way to the off position. So I'm going to turn it on and we'll see where the fuel starts flowing. And it starts dripping fuel. And right there it is stopped. So the safe point would be right where this center line intersects this arc. But in order to run good, I want to make sure and bring it back just a little bit further. And I'm going to mark it with a section of yellow tape, because you've got a red dot here for off, and that would be ignition off and fuel off. And this is fuel and ignition on. And we're going to put a piece of yellow tape to mark fuel off, but ignition or spark still on. Now if you don't have yellow tape, you could use a scribe and scratch a line. And that line is going to be the position that you're going to be running the generator in anytime it's on the remote tank. So if it's on the stock tank, you'd have it to the run position, and that's fuel and spark on. And to run it off the remote tank, you'd have it in this position, which is fuel off, but still spark on so that the engine will run. Okay, now we'll go ahead and put the fuel line back in place. And put the Corbin clamp back where it goes. And then we'll make sure to put the fuel in the off position so it doesn't drip on us when we go to do the next section. Okay. The next part that we want to do is take this panel off. The entire generator housing side has to be removed in order to give you access to the valve cover. The front and rear cover are all held on with these bolts. So the front has got 2 at the bottom, and then 1 on either side here, for a total of 4 on the front cover. Then the front cover unsnaps at the top, and there's 2 snaps that go into these little notches here. And that's as far as we need to pull the front cover off. The back cover is held on by 6 screws. And they're identical to the ones in the front cover. And the handle, there are 4 more screws that are identical to the ones that were in the front cover and the rear cover. And then there are 3 bolts at the bottom that use a 10mm head. These are shoulder bolts. This side will lift off. Okay. In the kit, you're going to get a bag of small parts. In this bag of small parts is a flash drive, and it has a copy of this video in a high resolution form without commercials like the YouTube version. Let's go ahead and take the valve cover off. just set this hose aside temporarily. You will be reusing it. This little 4,000 watt generator is not as quiet as a lot of the 4,000s because it only uses a 145 cc engine, where typically 145 cc engines are going to be around the 2,500 watt range. So because they are using such a small engine on this, they have to spin it faster to make power. And then they're fitting that whole thing in the size cabinet that is normally used on a 2,000 to 2,200 watt generator. So the fuel tank on this is extremely small, which makes it almost necessary, if you figure it up real quick, that it takes 0.2 of a gallon per kilowatt hour. This generator at full rated load would use up the entire tank in just over 2 hours. Or if you only had a 1,000 watt load, it would run for about 4 hours before using up all the fuel. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is disable the valve, the PCV valve, or positive crankcase ventilation valve, and that way we can take advantage of the pulse wave that is created by crankcase pressure and vacuum as the engine is running. There's a couple of ways that you could disable this. One of them is just take a pair of needle nose pliers and mutilate this little wafer. Just bend it back at a sharp angle and kink it. Or you can take one of the zip ties included in the kit and zip tie it in the open position, which is what I'm going to do. Not that I think that that's the better choice, but simply it's more difficult than kinking it, so I'll show you the difficult method. And if you do choose to kink it, that's pretty self-explanatory. So what I've done is I've just zip tied this little wafer back against the stop, so that now, as you can see, when I push the screwdriver through there, air can go both directions through this hole. So now we'll go ahead and put this PCV plate back in place. You'll notice there is a small hole here. What that's for is you're going to have air and oil blown in here. This little sponge is supposed to allow the oil to cling to it and run down, and then it'll drip through this hole back into the engine again. This is probably as good a time as any to point out, do not overfill this engine or any engine oil level. Too much oil is really not a good thing. If the oil level is too high, it'll have a tendency to whip into a froth and lose viscosity, so it loses its lubrication ability, or it severely reduces the lubricating ability of the oil. The next reason not to overfill the oil, particularly in this issue, is because when the oil foams up like that, it'll start blowing the oil out through the crankcase breather here and into the dry side of the fuel pump, and the fuel pump will stop working and your engine will stall, and then you'll call me up and say my engine is stalling and I have no idea why, and we have to go through a whole series of troubleshooting on it. Let me show you something real quickly here on the oil level. If you screw the oil fill or dipstick all the way in, you'll notice that it's got a line right here that says full and a line right here that says low. So that's with it screwed all the way in. So if you just push the dipstick in to where it touches, you don't want it to go all the way to the top of these hash marks. You want it to go about a ½ inch below the hash marks. Another thing is, hold it so that this handle is vertical. That way the dipstick is also vertical. So when you push it in and then pull it out, you're going to see the oil line runs at an angle along the dipstick. So right now our oil level is right here. I don't know if you can see that clearly on the camera or not. You can probably see it a little better here. But your oil level is right about where my thumbnail is. So you could actually add enough oil to raise that up by about 1/4 inch and still be safe. My kits come with a tube of black RTV silicone, so that if this gasket gets torn when you pull it off, you can use RTV silicone to put the gasket back on with. I'm not going to be using that at this time because I don't know how many times I'm going to have to reshoot this video, frankly. And I don't want gasket sealer all over the place. But if you were assembling it at your house or whatever, because this has a slight tear on it, I would suggest go ahead and use some of the black RTV silicone. And that would be this tube right here. The next thing, because this engine is so small, the pulse wave created by the crankcase pressure and vacuum is very, very small, so we have to be careful not to let any of it leak. So all the hoses, both the air side and fuel side, have to be clamped up well so that there's never sucking air in it or leaking air out. If that were the case, then it wouldn't pump enough fuel to keep the engine running. Okay, this is the original breather hose, and it used to slide on to here and over here. As you can see. So what we're going to do, first step, is to take the fuel pump that was included in the kit. There are 2 rubber caps on here. Go ahead and pull those off. There are arrows that are marking this is fuel in, this is fuel out, and this is the pulse line. Take the section of 1/4 inch fuel hose that was included in the kit and cut a section 6 3/8 of an inch. Six 3/8 of an inch section will go on to the fuel input hose. Then cut the next section 3 1/8 of an inch. And that goes on the fuel output. And we'll go over to the carburetor here. What we're going to do is we're going to remove the hose that goes from the fuel tank to the carburetor. I don't know if you can see that hose clearly. This one right here. Is the flashlight helping or hurting? Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to remove this Corbin clamp, and I'll remove the Corbin clamp and then I'll show you what a Corbin clamp is and how it works. And you can just rock the fuel tank over to give yourself enough room. Okay. So this is a Corbin clamp. If you squeeze in on the 2 tabs, the clamp gets bigger. You release the 2 tabs and it comes back small. In the kit, there is a 1/4 inch T connector. So I'm going to shove the 1/4 inch T connector into that stock hose, and then I'm going to use the stock Corbin clamp to clamp that off with right here. Then we'll take the fuel pump, and this is the output line on the pump, so it will go to the carburetor. This is the input line, so it's going to go to that T connector right here. Let me get just a drop of oil. To make this just a little bit easier to slide onto that input of the carburetor. Okay. We're going to take 2 of the white plastic clamps that came in the kit and put them on that fuel line. That was the clamp that was hidden behind the carburetor. This one here will be easy for you to see how it works. Just put the clamp onto the hose, then take a pair of pliers and squeeze down on it. That's all there is to it. Okay. This hose is going to curve around and go onto the top of that T. Like so. Unfortunately, everything on this engine is black, so it's like working on a Mercury outboard. It's hard to see on film. I don't know if the camera or the light makes it better or worse. I'll let you hold the light, and you can use wherever you need it. Okay, so the back hose has a Corbin clamp on it. I'm going to put one of the white clamps included in the kit on the top hose here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take the remaining piece of hose and slide it on here and put a clamp on it and just leave it hanging out here. Two more of these clamps. One of them will go on this hose. Now I'm going to face the retainer portion straight down on this clamp. Then I'm going to put another clamp on the fuel inlet line. Okay. So now the fuel pump is going to sit right here. Included in the kit is a fully assembled PCV valve. The PCV valve will have, where the PCV valve is, goes to the original intake. This hose goes to the pulse port on the fuel pump, and this, you're going to cut off approximately 1.5 inches of the original hose to connect this to this. So just a drop of oil on that too. You can get a drop of oil from the dipstick to make your life easier when putting these hoses together. I'm just going to pull that elbow out of there. Definitely works better to pull that out first. So now you have the little elbow facing forward. I'm going to cut this about 1/8 of an inch shorter. If in doubt, cut this hose longer than you think you will need, because you can always shorten it. I'm going to push this all the way on. This hose sits so close to the housing that there's not enough room to put one of the white clamps. So we're going to put one of these zip ties, and we're going to orient it to where the latching portion faces down so it doesn't get in the way, because it's that tight between the valve cover and the housing. So now, okay, I'm going to say I cut that hose about 3/16 of an inch too long, and like I said, it's better to cut it too long than to cut it too short, because you can always shorten it, but you can't lengthen it. Just a drop of oil on that. And we'll put another hose clamp, or excuse me, a zip tie, because there's not a lot of room. And again, face the latching portion down. These two clamps need to be facing down also because there's a bracket on the housing that goes around this. And we don't want it to interfere with that bracket. The hose clamps are nice because they are reusable. Unfortunately, the zip ties in the locations where you're going to have to use those because of clearance issues, the only way to undo the zip ties is to cut them. So we've got a zip tie here, and here, 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 and here. And that's because of clearance issues. There's just not enough room for anything else. Go to put the cabinet on. We're going to be putting the fuel inlet port right here, and it's a lot easier to drill it with the cabinet off. So where we want the inlet port to be is right in this area. So if you pull the foam back, you'll see that there's a web. Right here. You pull that section of foam out, you can see the web. So you want the fuel fitting, the hole to be drilled in the center of this area right here. We want the hole drilled just barely big enough for this threaded area to go into. I don't want to go any bigger with the step drill, but I don't want it to go too big. So I'm going to use a repairman's reamer just to clean it up just a little bit. Without cutting it crazy. Oh, it's got to go just a little bit bigger. Okay, that's a fairly snug fit. So now what we'll do hose barb. Take the Teflon tape that's included in the kit, and let me demonstrate this on one that's out in the open so you can clearly see it. When you wrap the tape around the threads, keep the tape from lapping over the end. In other words, if you were to get it like this, when you screw the hose barb onto it, it would shear off this portion, and then that would be in the fuel system somewhere. Incidentally, as you're facing the end of it, you want to wind it in a clockwise direction. That way when you're threaded on, it will get, the tape won't try to unravel and ball up on you. It'll actually stretch the tape out. So I'm going to hold this one and try to wrap it while it's in the housing, which is about the most difficult way to do it, but it makes sure that the housing hole is drilled as small as possible, because it would tear off the tape if you tried to wrap the tape on the fitting before putting the hose barb on. If you get frustrated and unable to wrap it there, then wrap it out here and clean up the hole just a little bit more so you can slide it in. Now you see why I said to go ahead and assemble this before we put it on the generator. A bit longer wrench. This is just a little bit tricky. There's a notch right here in this plastic cover that goes around this little tab, and then this goes right into this groove around this plastic or rubber grommet around the fuel fill. So I'm going to put the top 2 or 4 bolts into the handle first. Remember, 2 go in from one side, the other 2 go in from the other side. Okay. Then we'll put the 3 bottom shoulder bolts in place. Okay. Now before we put this cover on, I just want to make sure that that choke moves smoothly. Flashlight. Oh, you've got it. Just want to take one last look and make sure that no hoses are kinked or pinched or anything like that. So now's the easiest time to get all that squared away, if it is. Okay. Look it up. Get 2 more of those screws. Put them in the bottom of the front cover. Okay. This is the fuel inlet hose right here. We're just going to run it along here, then back up, and it's going to go onto the inlet port. So we're going to mark where we think it'll go. Go ahead and cut it. We'll put just a drop of oil on that and slide this hose onto the bottom. If you look in there now, you can see it clearly. And we're going to take another hose clamp and put it on here. I'm facing the fuel inlet port toward the front of the generator because I don't want it to snap on from the back and have it hanging down, or having the fuel line hanging down in front of the exhaust. Now, you notice this is the input fuel line, and there's a door right here that allows you to check the oil. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this hose, and we're going to put the fuel filter where you can see it through this service door. Keep in mind the fuel enters here and runs down this way, so you want the fuel arrows pointing in the direction of fuel flow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it so that the sticker with my advertisement faces away from me so that I can see fuel in the filter for the purpose of servicing it later on. Cut this right here. Okay, it all lays in there nicely. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and put the back cover on. The back cover has a little clip here. It's a little bit of a trick to get it to hook on just right. That's why I put the bottom on first. And if you'll notice, the little clip is what's holding it in place while I put the screws in. There are two more clips at the top, so I'm not going to put the center screws on. I'm going to bow this by putting my fingers in here and pulling out on the center to get this hooked in. And then we'll put the rest of the screws in loose. come over here and just make sure that nothing looks like it's going to be pinched, no fuel lines pinched or anything else like that. And we don't want this fuel hose to run over the recoil start rope. Otherwise, when you start that generator, the recoil start rope could touch the fuel line and cut it. Take the 4 shortest machine screws, put them back into this cover. Take this cover, and once again, just make sure that there's nothing pinched. And here is the panel that you take off to check the oil level, and you can now see the fuel filter, unless you have chosen to put the fuel filter in a different location. At this time, the installation is done. I would have you go and start the generator up. I'm not going to do it in here because we're in a small room, but start the generator the way you normally would, and slowly start turning this knob back to the off position, and make sure that this yellow piece of tape is right before it shuts off completely. Like, in other words, the mark on the fuel selector knob is facing the center of this yellow tape, and as soon as it drops off the side of that yellow tape, you want the engine to stall, and that tells you that that piece of yellow tape is in the right spot. If you can rotate it quite a bit before it hits the kill, then take the yellow tape and move it over, and that will be your new off fuel, and this is your off engine, because it kills the spark and the fuel. At this point, the only step left is to attach the decal with the operating instructions on it. That concludes the installation portion. If you want to watch the generator running, please take a moment to watch the demo video, at which point I'll go over this and I'll actually start it up. We'll be outside and I'll show you the steps to be able to run it. If you have any questions or comments, look in the section just below, the description section just below this video if you happen to be on YouTube. And it'll tell you to go to PinellasPowerProducts.com for any questions or comments. If you don't see the answer to your question on my website, please call me. That's why I'm here. I thank you for your time.